All right, guys, we got a lot to do today. For those of you that didn't see it, I posted about a 30-minute kind of review on Wednesday. School was technically canceled, so it was mostly just a, hey, let's make sure we're all on the same page about what's required of you. So that is from Wednesday's class. Again, I didn't go over new stuff, but it's there for you to help you with some of the content. All right, today is hopefully, we got a lot to cover because we did lose a day, but I'm hopeful that today we'll start to get a little fun because we'll transition into mechanical work, into physiological work, contractions, okay? So what do we know about mechanical work? It can be somewhat confusing, like if displacement is in the same direction as the force, again, you got multiple forces. I push the table, I got the force of me pushing on the table, but I got friction coming from the table, so whose force? So we're gonna keep it really simple. For our bodies, our agonists, the muscles who are doing a job, remember, work and job, work, contraction, job. Your agonist, when they are turned on, when they are recruited above resting tone, it's almost like a positive. Like I'm flipping the light switch on for them to do a job. So that is going to be the direction of our force, not linearly, but angularly. That's the positive torque, whatever agonist we're looking at. We've done this in 310, just maybe not with this exact verbiage. What agonist would I need in this exercise? My flexion pullers, right? My elbow flexors, because the dumbbell's trying to extend me. That's who I need to turn on above rest to do a job. So you can look at it as I need moments, torques from my muscles that are pulling in a flexion direction, flexion pullers. I need flexors, we call them in 310. I may not need them every time. But in this exercise, those are my positive forces. Those are the ones I need to do a job. So what this simple mechanical illustration is showing is that when the motion is in the same direction as your agonist, that's positive work. And positive work for us is positive contraction. And positive contraction for us is concentric. That's all it is. If your flexors are on above rest, they're doing a job above rest. You can't maintain this position all the time. So you're using your flexors. That's our positive torque, positive moment. But the motion I observe is extension. The motion is in the opposite direction of who's doing the job. That's what negative work is. That's what we call eccentric contraction. Now again, this doesn't work. We can't just say flexion is this, extension is this, because there may be an exercise where I need my flexors. Therefore, flexion is going to be the positive work and extension is going to be the negative work. The flexion is going to be the concentric and the extension is going to be the eccentric. But I could also just as easily do an exercise where the flexion is the eccentric and the extension is the concentric. So it has nothing to do with the motion. For this exercise, I need extension pullers. I need extensors because the dumbbell's trying to flex me. So that's what I have to visualize is working above resting tone. That's doing a job. So if I have motion in the same direction as my agonist, positive work, concentric. If I have motion in the opposite direction of my agonist, negative, eccentric. Makes sense? That's where negatives get their name. But negatives don't get their name because of a specific motion. You have to have the context of who's working, how are they influencing motion, and then they influence it through the changes in contraction. So in other words, you know darn well I'm working tricep, and I'm going to teach you about the KNES muscle from left to right, right to left. But there's so many students that would say, oh, flexion must be bicep. That's what we're trying to avoid. We identify our agonist. External forces trying to flex me. I'm going to need to turn on my extension pullers, my extensors. So if I see extension, that's positive work, motion in the direction of those muscles who are doing a job. And if I see flexion, extensors do flexion through negative work. You see? Right. All right. Force velocity. To kind of show you these extremes, I think I touched upon it last class. Think of it like this. Max effort eccentrics. If you were bench pressing a max and you can't quite move it, you're giving it all your might and you're holding it there for a few seconds, that would be isometric, right? But if all of a sudden it starts to go down, you're recruiting these muscles, motion is in the opposite direction, negatives. When you see these kind of graphs, these are max effort kind of illustrations. This isn't sub-max stuff, because in sub-max, I could choose to be greater, choose to be less. This is if I have a very low force in my arm, I can move it really fast, because it's lightweight. But the more load I put, the more external force I put, the slower I have to move it. It's just kind of common sense. Like, I can't move 50 pounds as fast as I can move 5 pounds. Make sense? And so as I increase the load, the speed about which I could potentially move it gets slower and slower and slower. This is zero velocity. And this is getting faster in the direction of the muscle's pull and getting faster in the opposite direction of the muscle's pull. That's super fast. That would be like if a house fell on me. I can't resist it any more than gravity taking it. So as I increase load, I'm going to potentially move it slower and slower and slower. 5 pounds become 10, 10 become 20, 20 become 30, 30 become 40. It's getting slower and slower and slower until eventually there's a load where I can't move even though I'm trying to move. Let's say that was 50 pounds. If I put 60, if I couldn't make 50 go in the direction of my pole, I start putting more and more and more, it makes sense it's going to start to go in the opposite direction. That's what that is. So the point of this graph is nothing more than to show you there's a relationship between force and speed, maximum force and effort and speed. You're not going to do a max bench and move it fast. Then it wouldn't be a max. You'd put more weight on. Does that make sense? Like any max you give is probably not going to be the fastest you've ever moved those joints in your life. This is the relationship between velocity, force. Well, I mentioned this last class about power, how optimal power lies in between. It's a little bit of both. It can't be as fast as you can, because that would mean I didn't have a lot of load, and it can't be as heavy as you can, because that'd be very slow. Again, a glacier can't break an egg. So optimal power lies somewhere in the middle between those two extremes. And that's what today's lecture is about. We're going to come back to that, is human movement strategies. Guys, 310, we emphasize human movement a lot, right? So we're going to put that into movement patterns. You should know what flexion and extension is. You should know what ab and adduction is. Movement patterns are multiple joint motions that either happen at the same time or in sequence, depending on what we need of them. When you move multiple joint motions at the same time, like when you're squatting or bench pressing, you run out of range of motion sooner, because everything's going to kind of get to the end of their rope quicker. But you get to have multiple agonists working on the same team. You get to, it's almost like if you were playing, or if you were doing a tug of war, multiple agonists all get to pull at the same time to create more force. So in other words, when you're squatting, you can have your knee extensors working with your hip extensors, working with your plantar flexors, all kind of working on the same hydraulic system to influence their independent joint motions, but because they're all happening at the same time, they can summate those pulls to create more push on the ground. The trade-off with simultaneous movement strategies is you can't make something go really fast. I'll give you a pitching example. If I was, when we were smaller, it was all about throwing strikes when we were little, because people hadn't had the eye-hand coordination yet. So when you're trying to throw a strike, you kind of shorten you wind up and you just kind of hold it by your ear and try like throwing a dart. But I mean, imagine a major league pitcher throwing a baseball like this. Probably wouldn't be a good idea. So simultaneous movement strategies are when we need accuracy. A dart is light, but you're not going to throw a dart like you would throw a baseball because it doesn't matter if it's going fast. If it stabs somebody in the neck, it kind of defeats the point of the purpose. So I'm going to take a more of a simultaneous movement strategy because I'm trying to be accurate. Elbows and shoulders moving at the same time, canceling out each other's rotation, and summating each other's translation. Does that make sense? What's the most accurate punch in boxing? The jab. It's more accurate because you have this happening at the same time as this. They cancel out each other's rotation, summate each other's translation. Simultaneous movement strategies for accuracy. Most of the time when people start, why is this important? As clinicians, coaches, people will start off in a simultaneous movement strategy until they learn how to be sequenced. You're not going to go on the ice for the first time and be like, shh, shh, right? You're going to kind of start off because you don't want to fall on your butt. It's safer to be simultaneous, and you learn to be sequenced. In golf, if you're trying to be more accurate, you're probably not going to crank back and rip it as hard as you can, right? You're going to sacrifice some sequence for the trade-off of the simultaneous. And I gave you some examples. Has anybody ever seen the Dr. Pepper challenge where they're throwing the football, but no one throws it like a football? Because it's hard to be sequenced and fast and be accurate. So they throw it like a chest pass in basketball because it's easier to be accurate with simultaneous movement strategy. Okay? Sometimes the limitations of simultaneous isn't enough. Any basketball players out there? So if I'm playing ball and I want to try to make an across the court pass, I could kind of step into it and do like this. But if my buddy is across the court, it may not reach. So in other words, it doesn't matter that I was accurate. I don't even give it a chance to get there. So I might throw it more like a baseball or a softball to make it go faster. But with that advantage of speed comes the disadvantage of accuracy. That makes sense? You can't have the best of both worlds. I'll give you a real life example that really happened, and I'm still scarred by it by this day. I was a freshman in high school and playing on the varsity basketball team. That doesn't mean I was good. Small school, like literally, like if you could walk and chew gum, you played sports at my school. I was a pitcher, but throwing behind a baseball is a lot different than trying to palm a basketball. And so as a freshman, there was a couple seconds left. Coach had me on the inbounds and he said, "Brian, I want you to throw it the length of the court to a friend of mine coming off of a pick, and he's going to shoot a shot." And I'm like, all right, like that big, like that skinny. And I took the ball and I just heaved it as hard as I could, and it went straight into the rafters. Yeah. Oops. I had to give it a chance to get there. My senior year, a similar situation, my coach was mean. Similar situation happened, and as a senior, Eddie said, and did this, and don't throw it in the rafters. I was like, good Lord, that was 4 years ago, man. There's trade-offs with speed and accuracy. There's a reason we try to lay down a bunt more simultaneous. It's because we're trying to be more accurate. If you're trying to go a yard, there's a greater chance you may miss. Like it's kind of common sense, right? So when we're analyzing sequenced motion, it's like popping a towel. The tip of the towel, you know that pop that you get from popping a towel or cracking a whip? You know what that sound is? That's a sonic boom. The tip of that towel or whip is going faster than sound. But I can't take the towel and make the tip go faster than sound by doing this with the towel. It's a sequence where I start off and every piece of that towel gets a little faster and faster and faster and faster than the piece that was before it, until finally the tip goes the fastest. So that's what happens when we throw. The tip doesn't start to go forward until the legs go forward, until the trunk goes forward, until the scapula goes forward, until the shoulder goes forward. Ironically enough, in throwing, your elbow, your muscles don't even contract you into extension because it's happening so fast. It's just inertia. But to make a ball travel 100 miles an hour, your fingertips have to go 100 miles an hour. And you can't do that by doing this. There has to be a sequence of buildup, a ramping up of speed. So with sequenced movement patterns, it's multiple joint motions that aren't happening at the same time. They're done one after the other, after the other, after the other. And the pros of that is we can get maximum speed of our distal segments. Like, think of it like this. When a kicker is kicking an extra point, do you think they're kicking that ball as hard as they can as opposed to kicking like a 65-yard field goal, right? Like, in other words, if I'm going to make the ball go 65 yards, I got to make my foot go fast. And the faster I try to make my foot, the harder it is to make it go where I want. That makes sense? That's the trade-offs, okay? So two extremes of motion. Simultaneous movement for accuracy, sequence for velocity. And we live in a continuum. These are the 0.0001% of humans. Their shoulders have motion that a majority of our shoulders do not have, or we've lost. What I mean by that is they can snap the towel and make it go pop. My towel at my age is frozen halfway in the middle. And so when I go to pop it, I literally lose like 2 foot of towel. So like, I'm like, speed up, speed up, speed up, frozen towel. And then the last part. I was at Dave & Buster's with my kids and I was not happy about my 52-mile-an-hour throw. Very humbling. See what I'm trying to get to, right? So these extremes. Typically, we start off simultaneous and we learn to be sequenced. Again, Little League pitchers are going to throw more. I'm not saying they throw all simultaneous, but they won't be a sequence because they're just trying to throw strikes. But then eventually, when batters are popping those things back at you, you got to start learning how to throw harder and harder and harder. And it's hard, not literally, to be accurate and fast. Professionals who get paid millions of dollars, full count, bases loaded, are trying to throw a strike, and sometimes it's ball fool. And so think common sense wise. If you ever watch baseball or softball for that matter, if you're trying to throw a strike, you're probably not going to throw it as hard as you can. You're going to take a little bit off of it. You're going to be less sequenced in order to be a little bit more accurate. Make sense? So again, in 310, we talked about specific joint motions. Now, biomechanically, we'll put all those motions together for function. Two extremes, pure simultaneous, force and accuracy, pure sequenced, speed at the expense of accuracy. So what lies in the middle? Power. Power lies in the middle. Simultaneous movements done in sequence. So think about a shot putter trying to make something really heavy go really fast. Are shot putters big people or small people? mountain people, like they are huge, but even they can't take a shot put and throw it like you would a baseball or a softball. So what they can do though is try to speed it up through lower extremity, and then when that reaches its top velocity, continue to speed it up with upper extremity. Think about like if you were trying to throw a medicine ball as far as you could. Wouldn't you want to incorporate lower with upper, but done in a sequence? You wouldn't want to do them all at the same time unless it was really, really heavy and you could barely move it. So nuance for power. Simultaneous movements done in sequence gives you a little bit of both. It gives you some of the strength that you need, and it gives you some of the speed you need. I'm going to give you one practical, because we could literally spend months going into the rabbit hole with this. And I'm trying not to do that, because the more you go into it, the kind of more confusing it gets. I'll give you one practical example I'd love for you to know for your test. Sprinting. Something we all either do or we work with people. Sprinting is powerful. And I'm going to show you the different things that manifest on each side of the continuum. Right arm going at the same time as left leg. They're happening at the same time. The accuracy is my left leg is trying to take me over there. My right arm is trying to take me over there. So they get to cancel out the angular momentum and keep me running straight. In addition, simultaneous motion, well, where's the force component? If I were to stand under the door frame and push up, wouldn't my feet push down on the floor more? Like in other words, if I had a scale and I pushed up, wouldn't the scale read more force going down? Force, counterforce. So when you raise your arms up, the reaction is to push more on the ground. So you kind of get that extra benefit too. Leg and arm go up, so therefore I'm pushing harder on the ground. Now the sequence motion is speed. Left leg, right arm, followed by right leg, left arm, followed by. Do we have any swimmers? You guys swim? So let's look at, I'll give you one more practical example I'll use on the test, but it's here. So just in your notepad, write down there's 4 main strokes in swimming. 5 if you count mine, I dog paddle. That's all I can do. What is the fastest stroke? Probably the freestyle, right? Then, what's the slowest of the strokes? Probably the breaststroke and then the butterfly. So then you should comment, I say, just your curiosity should be, why would anybody do those strokes if it's slow? Well, what if you had to tug something from behind you, like a boat or someone, or in other words, doing these simultaneous movements, yeah, they're not as fast, but they generate more force. So you're much more likely to be able to pull something heavy with those simultaneous type strokes. Does that make sense? Backstroke, again, is faster than a breast or a butterfly, but that's because you have more sequence motion. Then this, then this, then this. Now, it's not like the butterfly and the breast doesn't have a sequence, but it's usually upper followed by the kick of the lower, right? Again, that should incorporate power. Simultaneous motions, upper and lower, done in a sequence. Because again, at the end of the day, they're still trying to go as fast as they can. I'm just using these as an examples to show you our continuum of movement strategies that we have. People will tend to start off any movement, even though it's sequenced, more simultaneous to start off with. It's safer, less risk of injury, and you have to learn to be sequenced. Now, again, I don't know if people still roller skate, but if you see little kids roller skating, they're usually got it going all at the same time. And then you got to learn how to be sequenced. Because with sequence motion comes speed. Talladega Nights. I want to go fast, Ricky Bobby. And the faster you go, the harder it is to control. Okay? Here's, again, some more examples. Learning to be sequenced. Learning to be sequenced. Learning to be sequenced. Guys, if you're teeing off a golf analogy, you don't have to play golf. It's kind of common sense. The hole super far away. Professional golfers struggle to hit it in the fairway. It's hard to make something go fast and make it go where you want. So if you're close to the pin, you're going to shorten up your stroke. You're going to be less sequenced in order to be more accurate. That's all we're talking about. That's all I'm trying to emphasize. So what are you going to need to know? Say that 5 times real fast. The basics, guys, the definitions. Human movement strategies, simultaneous motion, multiple joint motions happening at the same time. What are the pros? What are the cons? Sequence motion, multiple joint motions happening one at a time. What are the pros? What are the cons? And then those combinations of multiple simultaneous movements happening in sequence to try to get some optimal power. And then the examples that I just gave you in class. Is that fair enough? Very straightforward. In the past, we used to go into a ton of examples, and that would just sometimes leave students more confused, which makes sense. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of different shades of gray on that continuum. So I'm literally just saying, I'm going to ask you these types of questions. If the strategy is for accuracy, you're going to have multiple joint motions happening at the same time. And if it's for speed, you're going to have multiple joint motions not happening at the same time in sequence. One after the other, after the other. All right, next part.